We have Gavin Dew from Kelowna-Mission, and he's an MLA for the BC Conservative, and we are at the AGM of the BC Conservative. Thank you for talking to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me today.
So, Gavin, something I really wanted to be talking about to you is about the economy, because you have been covering a lot of small business economy stuff in BC. So, tell our audience, what have you got so far in the state of BC's economy and small business in BC?
So, for me, I got into politics in part because I come from a business background, a lot of small business, and I'm very worried about the state of the economy. If you look at the last 7 or 8 years under this NDP government, they've grown the public sector by 36%, while the private sector has been totally flatlined. So that is an absolutely huge problem that we're facing right now, because if we don't have a strong economy and if we don't have private sector job creation, we don't have the ability to pay for the services that we all need. So these folks have run the economy into the ground, and now, of course, that's left us unprepared for the tariff crisis.
Does that also mean that it impacts the deficit of the BC and also the amount of skilled labor also coming to BC or living in BC?
Yeah, you bet. The deficit issue is absolutely massive, right? So we're coming in on a budget that will come out next Tuesday. We don't know how big that deficit is, but it's definitely going to be north of $10 billion. Right? So that means tons of deficit, tons of debt. And the problem is that deficit is now becoming a structural deficit where we've got just such a massive, massive government perched on the back of an anemic economy where tax revenues are falling off. Businesses in some cases are leaving and in other cases are choosing not to set up here. We're losing out on capital investment. We're losing out on job creation. And what really is the risk there is that we get into an economic doom loop where we've got a bigger and bigger government with higher and higher costs and higher taxes. Those taxes drive away the people and the companies that would be creating businesses here. And then we really fall into decline as a province. And I'm really worried that's what the NDP is driving us toward.
Well, that sounds like a bit of vicious cycle because of, the businesses leave, the workers leave, the tax revenue goes down, and the province really suffers, and they have left money on the table for the social programs or for the other infrastructure investments that are not getting. So it kind of seems like a vicious cycle for the British Columbians.
It absolutely does. And what really is terrifying is when you see what some of these NDP activists say online, they actually believe that the only good jobs are government jobs. And let's be clear, we need firefighters, we need teachers, we need doctors, we need all of these people, and we also need a private sector to pay for them. But these NDP ideologues just fundamentally only believe in government jobs. And they believe you can grow an economy starting with the government. The reality is you grow an economy starting with the private sector, starting with small business, starting with entrepreneurship, starting with innovation. And when you have that strong economy, you can afford to pay for a strong social safety net.
Have you seen any policy since after the elections in October?
Yeah.
Any policy that stuck to you and say like, oh, this is a bad move?
Well, I mean, it's such a target-rich environment in terms of bad moves. The government allowed small business BC to collapse and go bankrupt. That was a really important support system for small businesses that were getting up and running or trying to stay running. That was really terrible. We have vandalism and violence that is crushing our storefront small businesses. And there was a program the government previously rolled out, which was the Securing Business Rebate Grant, which was designed to help folks fix broken windows and things like that. They just let that expire. They seemingly failed to even get that money out the door because the program was designed so badly. So we have businesses, storefront small businesses that are struggling with the consequences of this government's soft on crime, bad drug policy, all of these things. And the one program they put in place to try to help those businesses, they cancel. So over and over and over again, we see this government making terrible decisions that are creating hostile operating conditions for business, but then they're also just failing to listen to business, to talk to business, and to understand what creates conditions for investment and business growth.
Do you see any threats with the Trump's tariff threat affecting BC's economy?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge, right? There are some key industries that are very materially affected. Our aluminum production is a big deal. Obviously, forestry with the softwood lumber piece has always been under threat. Lots of exports, major challenges. But there are also other things that we have control of. Like, for example, the effect of interprovincial trade barriers is equivalent to at least a 5% tariff. So my view is we obviously need to make sure we're trying to navigate through this tariff situation, but it also needs to be a wake-up call where we realize we have to start getting stuff done again in this province and in this country. And that means breaking down trade barriers, but it also means creating conditions where people can actually build things and do things again. We've got to this point in our culture where BC has a can't-do culture, where we come up with reasons to not do things. We drive away people that can and should be creating jobs and opportunities, and we're left with a weak economy and all the consequences we've talked about previously, we can't do that. We've got to turn the corner because policy is downstream from politics. Politics is downstream from culture. We have to change our culture back to a can-do culture where we get stuff done again.
The NDP has a mandate to run the government for the next 3-4 years. What can British Columbians expect?
More and more decline. Like, the reality is that this is a government that fundamentally doesn't understand business. What we're seeing now in response to us pushing hard on the economy and in response to the tariff crisis is this government is starting to pay lip service to the economy. They're talking about the economy, but the problem is they fundamentally don't understand the economy. They don't understand what creates conditions for investment and growth. And I think that now we've got some big talk about supporting economic growth. My worry is I don't think the premier actually believes what he's saying. I'm pretty darn sure that half of his cabinet doesn't believe in what he's saying. And I know that he's going to have a very internally divided party and a very internally divided grassroots that are going to be hostile to even the lip service that he's made towards supporting our resource sector, growing our trade enabling infrastructure, and getting stuff done again in this province. So I worry about how long that temporary momentum lasts.
Yeah, and also I think one part that British Columbians have seen is the amount of regulations that the province has in just, energy exports or anti-energy export policy that the government took. And now suddenly it's turning on back on us because of the tariff threat as well.
I couldn't agree with you more, right? We have a major red tape crisis. And the reality is we have a government that doesn't understand that. My counterpart in government, the Minister for Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, actually was posting these environmentalist anti-mining studies on social media and saying she didn't believe red tape was a problem in the mining sector. And she got absolutely hammered by industry who was saying, are you kidding? This is the minister responsible for economic development, and she thinks red tape isn't a problem. So we have that kind of thinking, even among the people in that government who are supposed to be responsible for growing the economy. That just tells you where we're at, right? There's just not a genuine commitment or an understanding of the economy, of business, and of what it takes to create economic growth.
What are your plans and the party's plan in order to educate the British Columbians of the dangers that we are in and how those education can be reflected on the polls?
Absolutely. So we're out there every single day in question period in the legislature, drawing attention to the aspects of what the government is doing that don't work. We've got to be out there in the media, setting the frame, talking about the economy, demonstrating exactly why it is these current policies don't work. We have to be out there talking to people on the doorsteps, in community groups, in everywhere we can possibly be, talking to people, listening to them, learning from them, and making sure that we increase the overall level of economic literacy and the understanding of what a threat we face from this government, from their ideology, and where this inevitably leads us, which is terminal decline and the loss of the economic vitality of our province.
My question that I always ask most of the politicians, especially in the BC, is what do you think about the media landscape and how does the role they play in the actual role they have as a fourth pillar of the democracy?
I think it's crucially important, right? In politics, there's always tension with the media. Every party gets pissed off at every media outlet that doesn't give them the story they want to tell. And I think, I understand that tension. I also know it's incumbent on people who are in government and in politics to build a relationship with media. Media aren't necessarily your friends all the time, but you need to have a professional relationship where you're available to media, you're talking to media, because at the end of the day, media have a job to do, you have a job to do, and media are a really important conduit to reach the people. And that's ultimately who we work for. So it's really, really important that obviously we want to build a strong independent media landscape. We want to make sure we have media who are offering good coverage, but we as elected officials also have to do our job by talking to media often, making ourselves available and driving our message through media.
Has the mainstream media been really helpful in that help?
Not always. I'm not going to sit around and complain about media treatment. In my opinion, as politicians, we have to do our job, do it well, and drive our message. And we cannot just blame anyone, including media. There are certainly frustrations with mainstream media, and I think that we're seeing growing independent media as a result of that. But at the end of the day, as a politician, you can't sit around and complain. You have to get out there, get your message out through every single platform that you can.
Well, thank you for talking to us, and thank you for putting the hard work.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time too.